Hi, I'm Phoebe.
Hi, I'm Brandon.
Hi, I'm Abigail.
Hi, I'm Drew.
I'm on staff with Christian Student Fellowship.
My name is Dustin. I'm actually also on staff with CSF.
I'm Hannah, and this is Liam, and we are on staff with CSF.
Welcome to Solid Ground. Solid Ground is basically our main meeting throughout the week. We want to make sure there's a time set aside where our students can enjoy the Lord's Word and be fed with spiritual nourishment. And so that's this time, Tuesdays at 7.
Hey! So, description box below has the outline. Follow along. You can click the link if you want, and then you can save the outline so you can refer to it later. Grab your friends and let's get started.
Hello, welcome again. It's not again for you, but it's again for me because this is actually my third intro. But anyway, thank you guys for joining us for Solid Ground. Hopefully you're with some buddies, you're watching. Tonight's Solid Ground, we're actually going to be talking about the 4 laws and the 3 lives. Don't get them mixed up. It's not 3 laws and 4 lives. The 4 laws and the 3 lives. And so this sounds really confusing, but actually all of this is coming from Romans 7. And so just to preempt this, Romans 7 is maybe one of the most important chapters in the entire Bible when it comes to understanding the Christian experience, even what our experience is. Romans 7 is a big deal. In fact, I would say that Romans 7 is the best spiritual kind of anatomy and physiology, or even I would say the best spiritual diagnosis for the actual condition of man. And so before we get into any of this stuff, and we go kind of deep into the depths of what these 4 laws and 3 lives are, I want to ask you guys a question, just to consider something. Have you ever seen anyone teach a child to say no? Have you ever taught a child to say no? Have you ever thought that it was necessary to teach a child to say no? So I know that most of you probably are not, most of you probably do not have children, but many of you may have had younger siblings or taken care of younger family members. You'll notice that oftentimes a phenomenon that happens with all humans, and this is just kind of the way it is, no one ever actually has to teach a child to say no. How does that work? You teach a child about everything in life. You teach a child what's good. You teach them how to talk. You teach them how to get into different things and how to learn and how to explore the world around them. And then one day you tell the child to do something and they say no. Well, where's that coming from? Where's the no coming from? Where's this little rebelliousness that's coming out in this child or this young sibling? And we're all this way, so I'm not pointing, I'm not calling out like children. But this is something that means that it's inherent to our nature. There's something within us that corresponds, that wants to say no, that wants to disagree. Let's see if I move closer. There we go. Just doesn't keep zooming. So what happens in Romans 7 is actually Romans 7 is what gives us the idea or gives us the understanding of why we are the way that we are. In fact, actually, I'm going to ask you a second question before we get into Romans 7. And this will actually be in our questions, but you can discuss it. Well, I won't ask the question, but I'll just state it. One of the biggest debates that has always happened within philosophy, one of the biggest struggles and tensions that has always existed when it comes to understanding the nature of man, is this question of, is man inherently good or is man inherently evil? And actually all philosophies today, all philosophies that deal with the interactions of people, that consider people, they come from either one or two of these perspectives. You either have one that assumes that all humans are inherently good, or you have another perspective that says all humans are inherently evil. And either one will play actually off of the good or evil nature. And in fact, both of them are off. Both of them, the answer is really, we'll get into this, the answer is yes. Is man inherently good or evil? Yes, he is. So if that answer is confusing, then that's great, because we're going to explain by Romans 7. And, fortunately, the Lord gives us a really incredible chapter that opens this to us, and it's Romans 7. If you read it on your own, it can be a little depressing, but hopefully this will be something that actually helps aid us in the rest of our Christian life. So the verses obviously are just basically the rest of Romans 7, coming off of the example that Brandon gave us, talking about this matter of having to die to the law, that we had to die to our old husband so that we could be married to a new husband. Well, flowing through from that, we get the rest of Romans 7, and the rest of Romans 7 actually explains kind of the condition of what's actually going on, what's going on inside there, what's going on inside you. So I'm just going to read these verses here, and we'll stop for maybe a little bit of emphasis for certain things. But Romans 7:7, what then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been the law, I would not have known sin, for I would not have known what it is to covet, if the law had said, you shall not covet. But sin, this is verse 8, but sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness, for apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. So we're gonna kind of get into this, but basically what he's saying is that sin is hiding behind the commandment. It's waiting for you to try to do the good. It even lets you see the commandment. It lets you see the reality of what it means to be good and to do good. And it's waiting for you to try it. And it's trying to trick you. It's trying to deceive you. It's not the commandment that's deceiving you. It's not the commandment that's the problem. It's sin waiting for you to try to do the good. And we're going to explain why it tries to trick us and why it uses this tactic. So, in verse 12, so the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Did that which is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I'm a flesh sold under sin, for I do not understand my own actions. Are some of you that way? I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. So to break down what he's saying, he's saying there are things that I want to do, but I do the things that I hate anyway. I don't do the things that I want to do. I end up doing the things that I hate. And so just to pause here, I think you've all had this experience, and maybe I can illuminate maybe some of my own experiences. I don't know, have you ever gotten mad at a parent for no reason? You just got mad. In fact, you might have even made a decision. I'm not going to get upset about this. I'm not going to lash out at my parents, or I'm not going to lash out against this person who I'm close to. I'm going to choose not to do it. And then a situation comes in, and lo and behold, suddenly you get angry. Everything that you said you weren't going to do, you end up doing anyway. And you end up going the rest of the day being like, why am I this way? Well, isn't that the common joke? For I do not understand my own actions. That's why am I this way? Well, Paul is explaining to us why we are this way. So, now if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So you already have something within you. This is what he's saying with this verse. What he's saying is you acknowledge that there's something good that you want to do. So where did that come from? How did you have something in you that knew that there was a good that you wanted to do to begin with? How did you know you wanted to honor, in my case, your parents, honor your father and your mother? How did I know that? Well, it's because there's a good in me that agrees with the law. It agrees with the law that's outside of us. And so, again, this is one of the laws. So if you're going to write down what are the four laws and the three lives, the first law is the most obvious one because it's the one that we talked about last week. It is the law outside of us. And so that's the law of God. So that's like the 10 Commandments. There's something within us that corresponds to this law that's outside of us. And that's the reason why we want to do good. We want to do good because there's something in us that matches that. And that's what Paul's saying here. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. So what is doing the evil? What's coming out to cause you to be upset with your parents when you decided that you weren't going to be upset with your parents? Well, Paul is saying that is the sin that dwells within us. So I don't know if you remember, we go back to the beginning of the Bible, just as a brief recollection. revisiting the beginning of the Bible. When man fell, man was created in God's image, and so we actually have Genesis 1:26. Man was created in the image and the likeness of God to express God's dominion on the earth. And man being made in the image of God actually means that he has something within his being that corresponds to God. So man, in a sense, was kind of a blank slate, but in reality, he was made to reflect God, to manifest God. So there's something naturally in man when he was created that manifests God, that corresponds to God. And so this is the good that we want to do. And then if you remember, what happened though is that later God had given them a commandment, or he basically told them, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He said, the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And so man, we all know the story. Man ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when he ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, actually that was sin entering into man. Actually, his death was not a physical death. Obviously, Adam was still there. God came and met him in the garden, him and Eve. They were still alive. He didn't dig up 2 graves for them. So where did they die? Well, they died in spirit. They died in the part of them that's meant to contain and express God. And so if you don't remember that, then go back all the way to the first solid ground that we did this semester, and this is actually one of the key things that we talked about. So what happened is when man ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it was like that tree was rooted in man's being. So now you have man's life created according to God, to express God, that has something that corresponds to the law of God, even if he doesn't have it, even if he's not aware of it. And that's the point that we made the first solid ground as we got into Romans. But now you have a separate thing that got into man, and that separate thing that got into man that produces sin is now warring against the good that's in your being. And so you have to understand, there's a classic saying, you don't sin, we aren't sinners because we sin. You sin because you are sinners. You are sinners. So literally something got into you, this other life got into you, and this other life is actually what is producing the sin that's within you. So if we continue here in these verses, for I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. So I want to do the good, but I don't have the ability to carry it out. And in fact, you'll see that he says that I have nothing good. Nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. So that's this stuff here, the physical body. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep doing. This is us, right? Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. So I find it to be a law. This is the first introduction of this expression, the law, not the law outside of us. So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law, waging war against the law of my mind, and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. So here's another expression of the law. So I know that you're probably thinking, okay, law, like legal law, because that's kind of how we think of the 10 Commandments. But when he's expressing law here, actually what he means is, maybe our biology or science people kind of picked up on this, but a law is kind of a governing principle. It's an automatic function that turns on if certain qualifications are met. I actually added the definition, so if you, at the bottom of the outline, so if you have an outline handy, you can look at the definition. But a law is essentially, as soon as certain parameters are met, certain conditions are met, the law kicks in automatically. And so the most classic example is the law of gravity. So here we go. Here's the law of gravity. I'm going to let this go. This paper towel is supported right now by my hand. But if I let it go, the law of gravity implies that it's going to fall. So anytime that I drop it, the law of gravity kicks in. The moment I let it go, the law of gravity kicks in. Now it falls. And so this is the kind of law that Paul is talking about here. And he's actually saying that basically the moment that he tries to do good, it's like immediately the law of sin is waging war with the law in his mind to cause him to sin. And so what does all this mean? Where does all this come from? Well, there's a law that governs life. So if every type of life, this is kind of an easy way to think of it, every life has a governing law, has a law that defines the way that life it acts, the way that it reacts regarding certain situations. So here's a classic example. No one ever has to teach a dog to pee on things, but male dogs particularly. No one has to teach a male dog. Male dogs don't teach male dogs to pee on things. They're not like, come here, son, let me show you. This is what you do to mark your territory. And male dogs don't have to sit there and think about it for a minute. I'm a dog, and I need to mark my territory because I need other dogs to know that this is my territory. So I need to mark it. I don't know how to mark it. So what's a good way? Oh, I could pee on it. That would give my scent. And then other dogs, they wouldn't come around my stuff. Well, the thing is, they don't do any of that stuff. They don't justify it. They don't reason it. We do those things kind of sometimes, but dogs don't do that. So there's a law that governs the dog life. The law that governs the dog life says, if you see the squirrel, chase the squirrel. You getting the picture here? And so there's actually a law that governs man's life, and this is where we were talking about how man was created in the image and likeness of God. Man wills to do good. That is a law that governs man. Man wills to do good. We want to do good. So the first law and the first life that you could say, if you want to outline this, is when man was created, there was the life of man, and then there was the law of good in our mind. And so this is here in verse 23, the law of my mind. And so then the second one, and we already talked about this, is that when man ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, sin came into man. So can you guess now who the origin of the sin is that comes into man? Of what is the life that introduces sin and this law of sin into man? Ask your neighbor right now. Shout it out like Dora the Explorer. I did say Explorer. So of course this is the life of Satan. So the life of Satan was manifested in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The life that got into you was not some weird thing that was obscure and abstract apart from anything that we knew in Genesis. No, the life that got into you was the life of Satan. It was sin that dwells in you. And there's tons of verses to back this up, especially in the New Testament. But this was man's condition in the fall. Man's condition in the fall, and even before you were saved, man's condition before you were saved is you only had two lives that you could rely on. You had the law of good in your mind, which is what you have corresponding to your human life. You have the law of sin and death, which is the law that is correlated with the life of Satan. And these two things are constantly at war. And in fact, the law of good in your mind, you want to do the 10 Commandments. The commandments are outside of you. See them, you know them, you want to do them, and you can't do it. I cannot do it. But that's the reason why, is because the law of sin is enacted as soon as you try to do the good. So that's why Paul was saying that the law of sin, it uses the commandments to trick you. It makes you think that you can do it. So what he does, what sin actually does, this law of sin, is it knows that you have good that corresponds to God, that wants to do the will of God. And so you see the commandment, honor thy father and thy mother. In the moment you will yourself to say, I'm going to do that. I am going to honor my father and mother. When I go into that conversation, I'm not going to go off the hook. I'm going to be fine. I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to have a normal conversation. The law is just sitting there behind it. It's like, yes, fine, we got him. He did it. He said he was going to do it. He said he was going to keep this law. And the moment you say that you're going to keep the law, that is when the law of sin and death comes in, and it tricks you. It makes you think you can do it, and then it comes in, and it results in sin. And this is a poor condition. This is a rough condition. And this is where we come to verse 24, where Paul says, wretched man that I am. Wretched man that I am. Maybe you've never gotten to the point where you've said, wretched man that I am. But if God is faithful, he'll allow certain circumstances where you'll be like, oh man, what is wrong with me? Wretched man that I am. Who will deliver me from this body of death? Who will deliver me? So, I'm going to show us a little bit of a diagram here. I'm going to have to do a little bit of a news anchor type thing here. So what you can see here is that this is us. So if you've never seen these circles before, we've actually had these before. Sorry, I wish I had a stand that I could put it up, but I don't really have a stand. So we're gonna have to do it in the worst way possible. But so this is essentially man. And so what you see is this outer part is corresponding to our body. This middle part here is corresponding to our soul. And this inner part, the most inner part, is corresponding to our spirit. And so what happened when man ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, when man was created, he was a body, a soul, and he had a spirit, but there was nothing in that spirit. It was empty. So in his mind, here in the soul, so your mind is composed of your soul, your mind, emotion, and will. And we can get verses to you if you want to see all those matters. But the law of good was here in our emotions, in our soul. And then when man fell, it was his flesh. That sin came into his flesh. So this is our body. So the law of sin and death, you could say, corresponds to our body. The law of good in our mind is here in our soul. And then finally, the freedom that we have. And over here, we've got the law of God, which you can see it's outside of us. The last bit here is, praise the Lord, we have now the law of the Spirit of life. So this kind of goes into Romans 8, but we're going to get into Romans 8 again next week. But this verse ends with, thanks be to God, through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself serve the law of God with my mind, but with my flesh I serve the law of sin. But now we go into Romans 8. Guess what? Weren't chapters when he wrote this. Romans 8:1. There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Jesus Christ. Why? Because the law of sin, or for the law of the Spirit of life, has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. The law of the Spirit of life has freed you from the law of sin and death. So our life is this constant back and forth. It's a constant battle. Before we were saved, and we can still experience this. We wouldn't say that you couldn't still experience this. This is kind of our Christian life. It's one of the reasons why we're so complicated. But the law of the Spirit of life had to come in to free us from this cycle of knowing that we want to do the good, willing to do the good, and then sin and death coming in and smacking us back down. Well, now we have the law of the Spirit of life in Christ. So when Christ died and resurrected on the cross, he said he was sending another comforter, and this was the Holy Spirit. And this was really him as the Spirit, which there's tons of verses on this as well. But he came back to you as the Spirit. And now there is a law, a governing principle, like the gravity. Paper towel's too far. Like gravity, there's a governing principle regarding the law of the Spirit of life. And this Spirit of life is a spirit that frees you from the law of sin and death. In yourself and in your goodness, you can never overcome the law of sin. Now, how do I know that? Well, actually, if you consider what was Satan. So, look around. There's the $5 question for anyone. Who was Satan? Who was he before the fall, before he rebelled? What life did he represent? Well, Satan was, I'm answering it now if you haven't already answered it. Satan was the chief of all the angels. He was the one who led the praise in the heavens. So not only was he an angel, and I don't think you could fight an angel. If an angel came today, manifested as a physical being, and you got into a fight with an angel, I've heard some of the descriptions of angels in the Bible, pretty sure you're not going to beat them. In fact, there are examples in the Old Testament where just a handful of angels kill thousands of people. So, can you take an angel? No, you can't take an angel. Well, what about the chief angel? What about the head honcho? You think you can take the chief angel? No, you can't take the chief angel. In fact, one of my favorite verses, Psalm 8, David actually says, "What is man that you consider him? You have made him a little lower than the angels." And so anyway, what we see here is that the battle that's happening without the law of the Spirit of life is the life of man, which is a little lower than the angels, and really in terms of struggles where we can't overcome the life of Satan. And then we've got the life of Satan. So these two things are what's in contrast with one another. I'm not going to do the tree of life thing again, but these two things are what's in contrast. So the law of good in our mind, corresponding to your life as a human being, is in a clash, in a battle with the life of Satan, the chief angel. So who do you think is going to win? Every time you will lose. Every time you will lose, because there is a law that governs that life, and that life, the life of Satan, is stronger than you. So that's why you'll lose every time. But again, what do we have as a resource? We have the law of the Spirit of life. In the law of the Spirit of life, what life does that correspond to? The law of the Spirit of life. So we've got man with the law of good in our mind, corresponds to man's life. We've got Satan with the law of sin and death that corresponds to Satan's life, the chief angel. Now we've got the law of the Spirit of life, which corresponds to whose life? It corresponds to God's life. God's life. So God's life, so if Satan is like, let's say that humans are here and Satan's, here, and he can slap us down every time, where do you think God's life is in relation to the scale? Actually, it's off the scale. The scale doesn't even exist. He's not even on the scale. The scale is only for created beings. He's totally in a totally different dimension. So that means that Satan will lose every time to the law of the Spirit of life. That's what the good news is. That is how precious and how important it is to see this matter of the law of the Spirit of life. Because if you incorporate the law of the Spirit of life, if you incorporate Christ who's in your spirit into this particular struggle, actually, the law of the Spirit of life wins every time. If you're a betting man, I wouldn't gamble, but if you're a betting man, you had to put your money on one of these 3 lives to win out in the end, I'd put it on the law of the Spirit of life representing God, because God will win every time. Satan has nothing on God. And so, in our experience, what does this mean in terms of our representation? Well, now as Christians, before we were saved, we only had the 2, and you're going to lose every time. You're wretched. We can still be wretched. If we don't experience this, we can still be wretched. But now we have the law of the Spirit of life, which is the life of Christ that's within us. And so now, actually, this is the wonderful thing is you have Christ in your spirit. When you were saved, Christ came into you, filled you up, and is now this law of the Spirit of life. When you contact the Lord in your spirit, immediately, again, this is the principle of a law, you enact the law of the Spirit of life. As long as you can touch Christ in your spirit, as long as you can experience Christ in your spirit, you enact the law of the Spirit of life. That's how you activate the law of the Spirit of life. And so let's say, go back to my old scenario. I'm going to go be around my parents. I don't want to be upset with them. I know that I shouldn't be upset with them because the law outside of me and the law that's within me that corresponds to it wants to do the good. I will to do it, and then the law of sin is like just sneaking around the corner. It's waiting for me to go about this. But before I go in there, maybe I turn inwardly a little bit, have a little bit of prayer, a little bit of consideration. Maybe I call on the Lord, I speak to the Lord. These are just practices that we can do to touch the Lord. Maybe on the car ride there, I find a few songs that I enjoy of the Lord. And I just bring this up. Lord, I want to have a good interaction with my parents. Lord, I need you right now. And maybe you don't even say these words. You just happen to start to enjoy the Lord. This is how sweet the law of the Spirit of life is. There aren't specific words that you have to say or a particular process. All you have to do is touch the Lord in your spirit. And as soon as you touch the Lord in your spirit, it's like you're lifted up. You're lifted up out of your situation. Actually, Ephesians says that we were seated far above all. Christ is seated in the heavenlies. And when you touch your spirit, it's as if you were lifted above the situation of the world, and you are lifted to be seated with Christ in the heavenlies. Above all, far above all. It doesn't just say above all, it says far above all. So when we enjoy the Lord, then we go into that time with our parents. Actually, the law of sin and death has no power over you as long as you're there and in spirit just enjoying the Lord. When you've touched the Lord and you've tasted that the Lord is good, and you're enjoying the Lord in that situation, the law of sin and death can do nothing when you're there. And in fact, you will love your parents, because you know why? Christ in you, as the law of the Spirit of life, is capable of loving your parents. He's capable of fulfilling the law. And so that's what you touch when you touch the law of the Spirit of life. So anyway, I'm hoping that this is really helpful to you guys for our Christian life. I know it is for me. A lot of times I come back to Romans 7 all the time, not just in my own experience, but even my understanding of the Word. my opening of the Word, I always come back. I'm always brought back to Romans 7. So we have a few questions here. So if you're with other people, feel free to try these questions. If you're not with other people, feel free to try the questions. I'm not going to hurt anybody. But really quickly, just as an announcement, some of our upperclassmen may know that we do this, but at the end of every year, we like to have what's called a celebration meeting. Last year, we kind of had to do it a little differently, or last semester, because of Corona. So we're going to do it the same way we did it last semester, which is to say, in our celebration meeting, we ask that you all consider maybe what is God doing, what has God been doing throughout this semester. And I know this semester is it seems shorter than any other previous semester. It's a wild time, but actually that's a good reason to be looking for what is God doing right now. So if this isn't something even that you consider on a regular basis, I would recommend it. Maybe take an account every now and then to ask the Lord yourself, Lord, what are you doing right now in this time of all these things that are going on? What are you doing in me? Are you doing something in me? If you feel like God's not doing something in you, then maybe you need to step it up. Maybe there's something else that you need to be looking into, or in terms of pursuing the Lord. And maybe you're just fine. Who knows? But you won't know until you bring this up before the Lord. So by the end of the semester, probably around Thanksgiving, we haven't worked out the specifics of when we'd like to have this done, but have some time to consider what is it that God has been doing in your life, and maybe for the whole pandemic. I mean, we haven't met with some of your upperclassmen guys since the beginning of the pandemic. We've maybe seen each other individually, but God can do a lot through these weird times. And so what we'll do is we'll ask all of you to record a video somewhere around like 1 to 3 minutes. Details to change. And just consider, what has God been doing in your life? What is he like kind of leading you to do? And maybe just record that maybe 1 to 3 minute video of yourself and your experience, what God has been doing. And what we'll do is we'll compile that into one nice meeting. So our last solid ground likely will be a compilation of everyone's experience. And it's really great, guys. Last year we did it, and it was one of like the best videos that I've seen that we've ever done. I don't want to look at me or Drew or Brandon. I'm just kidding. I don't. No, but seeing you guys and seeing you guys express your enjoyment of the Lord and seeing what the Lord is doing, and then we get to see that from each other, and we know, oh wow, the Lord really is working today. The Lord is really operating in my friends, the people who I'm with. So just be considering that. As the next few weeks come up, Lord, what are you doing? How are you operating in my life? Start to muse on it, and then eventually, when it gets closer to that time, it'll be great if we can get submissions from all you guys. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the message, and see you guys soon.